Carl Jung, the legendary Swiss psychiatrist, thought that the greatest danger to humanity lay not with natural disasters or diseases, but with our inability to deal with our own psyche. He thought people to be more dangerous when afraid than when they were angry. And as we're seeing now, nothing is more dangerous than a mass of frightened people. Now, very often in the cases of mass terror or mass psychosis, there's nothing to actually fear. In the witch hunts of the 17th century, there were of course no witches. In the totalitarian movements of the 20th century, the Jews weren't poisoning the wells, the kulaks weren't hoarding grain. Almost none of the fears were real. But reality didn't matter. It rarely does. Delusions rule when people are scared and irrational. This sort of thing occurs when a large portion of society loses touch with reality, but it doesn't happen spontaneously. Someone or some institution is usually egging it on. That can be the church, the communists, or anyone else with an axe to grind. So it's important to ask ourselves, who or what is driving this mass hysteria and how do they benefit? In such circumstances, reason and common decency go out of the window to be replaced with terror, suspicion, and the search for a scapegoat. With the witch trials, many women were accused of all kinds of magics, but we now know, of course, that not a single one of those charges could possibly have been true. That didn't stop the witch burning. In 1930s Germany, of course it wasn't the Jews who were responsible for the World War I defeat or subsequent economic crash of the 1930s, but they were a handy scapegoat. Also in the 30s, it wasn't the slightly more successful farmers in the Ukraine, called the kulaks, who were responsible for the failure of collectivized farms and the subsequent famine in the Ukraine. Always remember, when scapegoats are needed, scapegoats can be found. Such scapegoating never does any good and is often highly counterproductive. Killing the kulaks made the problem worse as the best farmers were taken out of the agricultural production effort. The mad anti-Semitism of Nazi Germany drove many of the best physicists to emigrate to the United States, which partially explains why the Americans got the atom bomb first. And today, if you venture into your local Tesco's and you don't look like either Dr. Kildare or Roy Rogers, you're spreading the virus. Setting aside the asymptomatic spreading is variously described as very unlikely or impossible, people are convinced you're the witch. It's pathetic. If you'd have said to someone 2 years ago, should perfectly healthy people wear surgical masks to go to the supermarket, you'd have been thought mad. Now you're treated like a leper if you don't have a dirty rag stuck to your face. Such paranoia, far from being condemned, is now urged on by the authorities. Jung tells us that those who join the lynch mob become both morally and intellectually inferior, and he's dead right. They become more and more irrational and emotional. These are dangerous times. Crimes the individual would never perpetrate alone are easily carried out by a frightened crowd of people, a mob. So if you haven't succumbed to fear and panic, if you don't blindly follow orders, if reason and evidence still prevail, then I salute you. The great irony is that people blinded by the mass psychosis simply can't see their own madness, any more than someone in an asylum can realise they're mad. Jung talked about the concept of an Archimedean point. This is a hypothetical standpoint from which an observer can objectively and accurately perceive something in the whole. It's a reliable starting point from which you can reason, but in the case of mass psychosis, no such vantage point can exist. So what gives rise to this? Well, they're fundamentally triggered by psychogenic causes like a flood of negative emotions such as fear, and as we all know, fear can lead to panic. Make no mistake, sage will know this. Now, people can't stay in a state of panic for very long. It's too emotionally taxing, so they will typically go one of two ways. Jung says the positive way to react to all this is to call forth more willpower, to understand this and really look at the underlying facts rather than simply swallow the propaganda whole. This is both a moral and an intellectual effort, and strong, self-reliant, positive people tend to behave in this way. If you can do this, you emerge from the other side stronger and wiser. I'm sure this has been an experience for many of us, but we haven't given way to panic. It's been tough, it's been taxing, but we're better for it. However, weak, insecure or helpless individuals, those who look to daddy government for help, can't do this. At the extremes, these people can suffer a psychotic break. This is a reordering of how reality is perceived by the individual. These things are rarely positive, life-improving beliefs, as they aren't based on reality. People who suffer psychotic breaks tend towards having a weak ego or poor self-esteem. They simply can't deal with the feelings of fear and panic which just overwhelm them. Dostoevsky famously said, "It wasn't you who ate the idea, it was the idea that ate you." That's a profound truth. So there are some fundamental questions we need to ask ourselves right now, because this is reshaping society in ways which are hard to imagine. First, if the jab works, why do you support vax passports? However, if the jab doesn't work, why do you support vax passports? Think about this. The passports themselves fall down on first principles. If the vax works, why is anyone afraid? If it doesn't work, why would you compel anyone else to have it? This is a logical fail from first premise. Now, if, despite that, you accept the case for effectively mandatory vaccines, think about what you're giving up. You are surrendering bodily autonomy, your right to decide what goes in your body. If you don't have this basic right, are you truly free? And think about the precedent you've created. You're saying to the state, if you want to put something in my body, but I don't want it, you have the final say. You're creating a sort of in loco parentis role for some government bureaucrat over your own life. Where could that end? Forced vaccines, forced medicine, forced treatments. How about vax passports at the checkouts of supermarkets so the government can monitor what food you buy? Eating a little too much? That creates pressure on the NHS, so your ration will be cut this week, citizen. No food for you for 7 days until your BMI returns to an approved range. If you allow someone to control your health, on what grounds could you object to even this? Is this the future you really want? So how do these episodes of mass hysteria end? The emotional intensity of these things and the basic irrationality mean that no matter how much propaganda is generated, these things can't be sustained. The Salem witch trials, for example, began to collapse as people on the ground, on the inside, one time zealous prosecutors began to have the doubts. At first, these people were ignored or even imprisoned, but as more and more spoke up, justice was eventually restored. And that's how this can end. People on the inside need to speak out. They can't sack all of you, and if memory serves, you took a Hippocratic oath to do no harm. So ask yourself this question, and please note YouTube, this is a question, not a statement. By supporting lockdowns, by suppressing other unmentionable treatments, by demanding people wear masks, and by injecting people with the vax, are you abiding by the Hippocratic oath? Yes or no? It's on you, insiders. Will you stand up for what's right? Will you stand up for freedom, or will you hide in the shadows and keep collecting your stipend? The money won't help you in the end. Hundreds of thousands of pounds or 30 pieces of silver, it's all the same, and we know how that story ends. So do the right thing, stand up and be a hero. So if you like this, please like, recommend, subscribe and retweet, etc. Also, if you are a subscriber, it's probably worth checking to see if you're still a subscriber, because for some reason YouTube deleted some of them. You might just want to check it out. Thanks.